Hi, Steve here. I'm the Laughing Stoic, and today's talk is all about feelings. You know, those things that separate us from computers and Vulcans and other clever devices. So, feelings are something that Stoics traditionally don't pay so much attention to. There certainly are some quotes from Seneca and others about them, but Stoicism is largely about managing your feelings. So, what I've illustrated today in both a diagram and a graph is what goes on in your brain to create feelings, where they fit in the process of dealing with perception and the world, and then to go from there to how information flows through your head in a sort of graphical way, showing you where the feelings arise, where your thoughts arise, and then through to action in the exterior world, which of course then leads you back to perception again, and more feelings and thoughts and more actions. So enough of the talking, we'll get on with the diagrams and the graphs. So here we go. So time to look inside the old head. And of course what you might find in there is a very badly illustrated brain, and underneath so just in case you were wondering, there we go. So that is the brain and where we experience the world. Don't worry about the top of the scalp there, you don't need that. So what happens inside here? So basically information comes in from the senses. So I'll just draw that in purple. The eyes are particularly important. We'll just put those actually under the brain, but let's not worry too much about that. And it comes up from your spine and from all your other cranial nerves, include your ears and stuff, and this information flows into the base of the brain, which extends up into here. Now, a couple of things happen in the base of the brain. The first sort of thing is that there's a system right through here which crudely decides how much activity you need to be engaging in. So, so this is an activating system, and so it fires off to a degree in the system here how much activity, how interesting is this, how frightening, or whatever else. But primarily it just says, should I be more or less active in the face of these environmental stimuli? And then the second thing is there's a gating system in the bottom of the brain which determines what sort of flavour of experience this is. Now these are a series of basal brain structures which you can't really look into from your own perception, but they include the thalamus and other basal brain ganglia type structures as well, and they basically decide how you might feel about the stimuli, the information that you're receiving, your perceptions. And the interesting thing about these is that they light up the brain in a pattern which is determined by the feeling state that you would call it. So it creates an active brain state on the basis of the raw data that flows in through the brainstem. And let's say that red is anger, and it will preferentially light up bits of the brain all over here in little sweeps, and it might light up your your motor and sensory cortex particularly, because you might have to do some motor activities, but it'll also light up bits of the brain in other areas. So if that feeling in fact wasn't anger, but was in fact, say, greed, then it might light you up as well, but maybe not so much, and some areas would be the same and some areas would be different, and maybe it might light up your motor cortex a bit more so you could greedily acquire things. So every feeling state that you have has a pattern, and that's experienced in the context of a level of activation in the brain. In other words, that more activation of the brain will lead to stronger lighting up of these areas of the brain. So when I say lighting up, that means that sort of blood, glucose and oxygen flows into those areas, and they are primed to act in whatever way you might need to do in that situation. But it also means that you experience the world through this filter, you might call it. It's sort of an active filter. It enhances certain things and it diminishes others in your view of the world and your tendency to act. So most of the time probably your brain is sort of relatively fluid in terms of its level of activation across the cortex, and it can pick up things and look at them somewhat impassively. But once your brain gets to be very emotionally lit up, then it will be strongly biased to look at things, to perceive things in a certain way, to interpret them in a certain way, and to act in certain ways. So what I'd like to do is talk about that tendency in our minds next. Right, so now we've got the sensory information coming through the brainstem and its bits and pieces and turning into emotional states, which become functional brain states. I didn't mention this actually flows up through a thing called the limbic system, which is how the brain's activated by emotional states. I'll just draw a couple of emotional states in there. So then, almost within a microsecond or two, the sensory data flows up into the brain, into the, well, from the eye, going over here to the occipital cortex, the spinal cord will come up to the primary sensory cortex, and various other parts of the brain specialised for hearing and such like. So what happens, in fact, is that just slightly before you interpret information through your awareness, your brain is tuned by your emotions to receive and process the information in certain ways. So those feeling states bring to mind certain thoughts, certain memories, perhaps, and certain tendencies to act. As we've noted, a general level of activation might also accompany certain emotional states, whereas others might have reduced activation, say grief might lead to less activity and withdrawal. So now we'll go to another diagram where I'll show you how this might be represented in terms of your process of thought and then action, because the whole purpose of all these processes and states is to lead to the best actions that are best adapted to your situation. So now we're going to look at this in a different way. What we'll do is we'll draw time proceeding along a line at the bottom here. Ooh, it's going to be a bit tight. And maybe your reactions along a line here, and we'll maybe illustrate this a little bit more later. So as time passes this way, it also will illustrate time passing this way as information goes into your brain, so we can map out what's happening inside your head in the face of environmental circumstances. So let's say that things are happening and you're a scientist at CERN and you have to go down to the laboratory on Christmas Day before your kids open their presents, or maybe you don't have any kids, another source of sadness, and do some scientific experiments down here, which are reasonably interesting, but not super interesting. So because you like doing scientific experiments, it's a bit stimulating. We'll give that a black line from the brain stem there. And you're a bit sad because you're not really doing anything very exciting on Christmas Day, and you're having to go to the laboratory, let's say with your wife who also doesn't have kids, and what are you going to do about it? So you say Merry Christmas to your wife, you're feeling a bit sad, and you maybe phone your parents. So you engage in actions up here, which you've thought about. Now, the thing to say about this feeling is it actually carries with it certain thoughts automatically. So it also, we'll call them square thoughts because they're sort of sad. So certain thoughts come along with the feeling of sadness automatically, and also you're receptive to sad ideas. Okay, so that's all a bit terrible. So you decided on the basis of that to make some connections with people outside and have hopefully some Christmas cheer out of that. I don't know. Anyway, as you go along through your day, your wife starts chatting cheerfully to the chap who is your laboratory assistant, and he's a young, handsome sort of chap. Now, this doesn't cause sadness, this causes jealousy. And we'll call that with green, the green-eyed monster. So you get a big spike of jealousy, and you don't like that. And let's say that that's rather activating as well. You really don't like this, and it really piques your interest and makes you focus on it, and you get this feeling of you don't like this chap chatting to your wife in such a cheerful way on Christmas Day when you're busy with scientific experiments and don't have enough time to devote to her. And that may be enough also to provoke some actions, and let's say on the basis of that we'll make these the same colour. You generously send the laboratory assistant home early. So he's not there to chat to your wife, and this resolves the jealous feelings, although it may cause some trouble with your wife, who was having a bit of a good time. So that's all very well. So anyway, let's say the two of you travel home separately because of this, and now you're driving along and you're holding Monaro without any catalytic converters or anything like that, so it makes a good noise, and you're feeling a bit happier and cheerful in this, and that's all very well until someone in a Hyundai Getz overtakes you on the highway. My God, how could that happen? This is not happy, and you're unfortunately one of those chaps who's a bit prone to road rage, and so you get this big spike of anger, which we'll illustrate in red. And what's more, I'll just illustrate, this captures your line of action. So I didn't really say it, but beyond the line of action, what happens is we go out into the world and there are various reactions, and then that kind of takes us back to the next part of the cycle. So you kind of go in a big loop round here as you progress through time. Anyway, you're not happy with the Hyundai Getz, so you're stimulated into a lot of action. There's not much thinking going on. You gun the accelerator, get some more satisfaction out of that V8 engine, and off you go. And so you have now successfully overtaken the Hyundai Getz, made a lot of noise about it, and that's great. So you're settling down, feeling very satisfied with yourself, not feeling like any more actions, and in fact the anger is starting to resolve, the red mist, as they say. That's great. But now, annoyingly, down the bottom here, we'll put it in blue because the boys in blue turn up and they start giving you some sensory perceptions, i.e. they're flashing lights and sirens, and they're telling you they want you to pull over, which makes you angry as well, but not quite as angry as when overtaken by Hyundai Getz. And let's say at this time you come to your senses and your anger kind of starts to resolve because you realise you're in the poo. And so in fact your actions are to not do anything dramatic, and you start thinking in here about what you should do, because in fact you've had some speeding tickets before and you've been pulled over before the cops, and you know you're on so many points and you're about to lose your licence. So common sense comes to the fore, and you pull your car over, and here we talk to the police. And during that time, hopefully your anger resolves and you don't vent on the police, because they won't like that. So this is kind of an illustration about how things go. So as you'll see, information comes in from the world, kind of varying degrees of activation, attached emotions, which then have their own attached thoughts or are receptive to certain thoughts. We can illustrate those in here, some more square thoughts. This is the sadness on Christmas Day one, but then maybe some happy thoughts, nostalgia maybe, Christmas decoration type thoughts. And then you mix them up and you decide how to act. The closer that your emotions in this illustration come to your sort of line of action, then the less thought you put into what you're going to do. So that's action, and this is perception. Right. The closer the emotions themselves and their automatic thoughts and plans determine what you do, and that is indeed the problem up here. As we get into anger, and we don't like Ndogetsus, and we certainly don't like them overtaking our Monaro, then we've got all these terrible thoughts here going on. We love those, our brains are receptive to them, and we start acting directly on the basis of the thoughts and feelings. So our feelings pretty much determine our actions. We act out on our feelings, as says. And so this line of action is directly responsive to the feelings that underlie it and the automatic and associated thoughts and plans that come from that. So that is what Stoics call a passion, and they don't think you ought to be doing that. You should always have some degree of thought between feeling and action. And this is a very bad thing, and finally this chap's come to his senses when the boys in blue turned up, and he's thought about some more helpful actions which are not based on the red colour of his anger, which is slowly settling, and he's managed to get himself out of a lot of trouble. So perhaps doing what you're told to the police is a sort of thought he might have. You might illustrate it like that. And the red line isn't particularly receptive to it, but he's got some space in here. And this is the space that the Stoics talk about. This is about some sort of tranquility in your thoughts, not being so perturbed by emotions. But in order to do that, you do need to understand what your emotions are doing. And the primary tool that Stoics recommend is temperance. That is to delay acting on the automatic thoughts generated by your feelings. And this is what's not happened here, but has happened here. So that is a short illustration of what happens inside your brain as you might perceive it, because I think this view is the one that you might have in your life. Things happen out here in the world, you get various degrees of activation feeling in your body and your mind, you get various feelings flavouring that, and then you kind of think about it to a varying degree. It's include memories in there, and then you act. And occasionally things kind of overwhelm you and you act directly on your emotions. So if you understand that, I think you understand the core of the inner view that Stoicism generates of your mind. Okay? So we'll leave it at that for the moment. So that's it for feelings. Please leave your thoughts and comments below. I'll try to respond to those if I can. And remember to like and subscribe. And we'll see you again in a week's time. Cheers.